Welcome to Mac Stories Unwind. Today's show is brought to you by Collide. I'm John Voorhees, and I've got Federico Viticci with me. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm having a great day. Because you just published one of my favorite Ticci style stories, which is, it just combines a lot of stuff that's like basically all of your interests in one little package, and many of my similar interests. In a story that's just a lot of fun. Why don't you explain what you've done?
Yeah, I mean, so this story has everything, right? iPad, HDMI cables, an
Yes.
analog pocket console, a Game Boy camera, an iPad OS 17, the beta that is coming out as a public release soon. So here's the backstory. I am writing my iOS and iPadOS 17 review. It's really coming together. I'm well into the second half of the review, so it's really coming together at this point. And I had the iPadOS chapter ready to go a few days ago. And part of that chapter, I talk about Stage Manager and all the other changes to multitasking, but there's a section of that chapter where I talk about UVC. That stands for USB Video Class. That is a new type of accessory that is now supported in iPadOS 17, meaning you can now use external webcams on an iPad Pro or really any other iPad that has a USB port. And the idea is, to start from the basics. If you have an iPad Pro and a studio display, for example, like I do, you can now use the display's integrated webcam as the iPad's camera. So whether you want to be on a Zoom call or a FaceTime call, and maybe your iPad is not in front of you, you're in front of the external display, now you can use that external camera. So iPadOS 17 can detect external webcams and use them as the default camera of the system. Now, as I explained months ago in my iPadOS public beta preview story, I also discovered, and a bunch of people discovered, that you can the support for UVC extends beyond webcams and in fact includes any device, any video-based device that uses the UVC standard to pass video over USB to a computer. And in that category of devices, there are video game capture cards. These are little, usually HDMI-based adapters that allow you, and have allowed for years now, Twitch streamers, for example, to put the image, the video of a Nintendo Switch, of a PS5, any video game console on a PC screen and stream it online. And the same kind of workflow is now supported in iPadOS 17. Back in June, I showed off some screenshots of my iPad being used as a display for the Nintendo Switch, playing Zelda Tears of the Kingdom on my iPad Pro. That is possible thanks to a third-party utility currently in beta called Capture Pro UVC Viewer. And that is essentially a viewer app for USB video class devices that are passing video to the iPad in iPadOS 17. Now, that was a previous story. I was writing the review and I wanted to have a little more detail, about how this all works. And I discovered that in addition to using a third-party app to capture the video coming in from a USB-C cable, you can also view the video stream for a capture card in the FaceTime app.
Mm-hmm.
The idea being that iPadOS thinks that a webcam is connected and it changes the default camera to the external device. That leads to the kind of scenario where you can have, for example, Elden Ring playing on a Steam Deck showed as the quote-unquote camera view in FaceTime.
Right, because you're running it through the capture card.
You're running it through the capture card. The capture card transfers the incoming HDMI signal into USB video signal. iPadOS sees that signal and thinks, well, it's a camera. Let's put it up on FaceTime. So I started developing this theory. Well, what if instead of showing my face using the selfie camera on a FaceTime call, can I actually show a video feed from a video game console over FaceTime And sure enough, it works. So I have the official Steam Deck dock made by Valve. I called Sylvia on
Right.
FaceTime while playing Elden Ring, and she
She pointed at your dog, basically, right?
she pointed at the dog, and it was like, I was like, Elden Ring was having a FaceTime call with Sylvia, and which is silly, but it works. And I mean, I'm kind of thinking about the potential here for like gameplay sessions with friends,
with a small group of people, right?
with a small group of people played over FaceTime.
It could
with
be
a
kind of
capture
fun.
card.
It could be kind of fun.
It could be kind of fun. But then, like the meme, I started having this bigger brain theory moment. Well, so you can do external webcams, then you can do capture cards, then you can do capture cards in FaceTime. But what if I used a capture card to show a Game Boy camera and to use a Game Boy camera as my FaceTime camera for a video call?
Right. And there are a couple complications with this because first of all, a Game Boy doesn't have HDMI out, right? I mean, you need to, I guess the place to start is with how you got an HDMI signal out of a Game Boy.
Exactly. So obviously the Game Boy camera, the camera itself is not a webcam. It's a game. It's a game cartridge.
For taking still images too, right?
For taking still images, the viewfinder, of course, animates as you move around, but then you got to press A to capture a static image. Back in the day, the Game Boy camera came out in 1998. It's an official accessory made by Nintendo. It used to be sold with a printer. You could buy this optional printer that required specific paper to print out your very grainy, low-quality pictures. And the Game Boy camera has become sort of a cult-like device over the past decades. Like people still buy and sell Game Boy cameras.
There are whole mods designed 3D printed so you can put like different kinds of lenses on it because I think the Game Boy camera has a very fixed focal length where you have to be pretty far away from the camera for it to be in focus.
Incredible.
Right? And so there's zooms and there's people doing all kinds of fancy lenses on these things, that might be one of my winter projects because I just need to get a second Game Boy because you have to take the Game Boy camera apart and put it in a new shell, basically.
Yeah, that is incredible. So anyway, I had a theory.
Mm-hmm.
My theory being, I have an analog pocket. The Analog Pocket, incredible modern take on the Game Boy made by the folks at Analog that lets you play original Game Boy cartridges. And it comes with upscaling built in. It upscales Game Boy games to 1440p. But if you use the dock, the Analog folks make an official dock for the Pocket, which I also have. It outputs video signal to 1080p. So you can play with native upscaling, and the upscaling from the Pocket is really good. You can play Game Boy games at 1080p on a TV or any other HDMI display. And all the pieces for my theory were in place. I needed an Analog Pocket, a Game Boy camera, which I had to buy on eBay because I never owned a Game Boy camera before. This is the first time in my life I have a Game Boy camera. I had the Analog Pocket, a USB-C power adapter, an HDMI cable, the capture card, and my iPad Pro. At first, I tried to make this work with the NZXT video game capture card that I've been using for my Steam Deck and Nintendo Switch. But for some reason, when I plugged my Analog Pocket and fired up the Game Boy camera, that capture card was not working with FaceTime. So I had to use the Elgato Camlink HDMI dongle. This is a similar type of accessory. It lets you use external cameras like DSLRs on a computer via an HDMI cable. So with the Elgato Camlink 4K, it worked immediately. And I started taking screenshots and I did a test FaceTime call with Sylvia and everything worked. And I sent a screenshot to Mike and Steven right after connected earlier this week. And they were like, dude, what? Like, what have you done? I was like, hey guys, check this out. And they were like, you got to blog about this immediately. And so I took a part of my iPadOS review chapter took the section about UVC, sprinkled some additions here and there, turned it into a blog post, and published it on Mac Stories. And as you can see in the article, there's me and John, because in the meantime, John and I had been talking about this for a few days. John also has a similar setup to mine, but we had our FaceTime call, both of us captured from a Game Boy camera, 2 Game Boy camera video feeds on FaceTime. It was incredible. It totally works.
It works remarkably well, right? I mean, it's a little bit laggy, but it works quite well. And were you using AirPods? It was a little hard to tell. I was using AirPods.
I was using AirPods too, yeah. Because obviously the Game Boy camera doesn't have a microphone.
Right.
But yeah, so, I mean, this is ridiculous, right? Why would you do this? First of all, because it's a fun weekend project and it's fun to, the Game Boy camera is this weird, in a loving way, sort of device from 25 years ago that still works, and now you can find new life for it. I've heard of people sort of pranking other teammates and colleagues on Zoom, for example, but by using a Game Boy camera on a PC and looking all green and pixelated.
Yeah. I think what's great about the Game Boy camera is it's like all Nintendo stuff. It's made for kids to really bang on. So these things last forever. And so a Game Boy camera today works just as well as when you bought it in the 90s. But to give people an idea, the sensor is 128 by 128 pixels, which is, and it can store 128 by 112 grayscale digital images, it says in what I'm reading here in Wikipedia. And it's got a color palette of 4 colors, which aren't really colors. They're just different shades of greenish gray. So that's the rudimentary camera we're talking about here.
That's incredible. Yeah. So go on. You can find all the screenshots and a GIF on Mac Stories and all the details. John, you have a slightly different setup from mine.
I do. So when I did this, I had everything but the cam link. I didn't have a cam link. I have the same capture card as you. And when you had told me that it was having troubles, I looked on Amazon, and as soon as I saw I could get a cam link the same day, I thought, well, of course I'm going to do this. So I got my cam link. What I did was I used, I guess the thing that I did that was a little different is that I have a Thunderbolt 3 hub that I'm using, because I did try originally just to kind of use one of those 12 South hubs that you can connect to the iPad Pro, and it has, it has jacks for Ethernet, USB-A, USB-C, all that kind of stuff. But they're not, they can't actually power the signal that has to get into the iPad. So I ended up using an OWC Thunderbolt 3 dock that I happen to have and I'm not using. And that was powered with I guess I have an Anker 727, which is one of these charging things that has 2 USB-C, 2 USB-A, and 2 regular standard US plugs in it, which I use out on my patio quite a bit because I can set that thing up and plug basically anything in it and power it. So that's how I was powering both the dock for the Pocket as well as the Thunderbolt 3 hub. But otherwise, I think our setups were pretty similar.
Yeah. So, that's the story. And obviously, much more to come, including a surprise that I haven't told John and that I had to cut from this segment that I published on Mac Stories today.
Interesting.
The full chapter will have more.
Interesting. I'm looking forward to it.
Stay tuned, I guess.
Yeah, I think Federico and I are bad influences on each other. We've been working on a lot of different secret projects, and mine are I have a couple, but they're kind of on hold at the moment because there's just so much else going on with the Apple event coming up. This episode of Mac Stories Unwind is brought to you by Collide. If you work in security or IT and your company has Okta, this message is for you. Have you noticed that in the past few years, the majority of data breaches and hacks that you read about have something in common? It's employees. Hackers absolutely love exploiting vulnerable employee devices and credentials. But it doesn't have to be that way. Imagine a world where only secure devices can access your cloud. In this world, phished credentials are useless to hackers, and you can manage every OS, even Linux, from a single dashboard. Best of all, you can get employees to fix their own device security issues without creating more work for IT. The good news is you don't have to imagine this world. You can just start using Collide. Collide is a device trust solution for companies that use Okta, and it ensures that if a device isn't trusted and secure, it can't log on to your cloud apps. Visit collide.com/MacStoriesUnwind to watch a demo and see how it works. That's KOLIDE.com/MacStoriesUnwind. Our thanks to Collide for their support of the show. Federico, before I go to my pick, I thought I would tell you that I cooked grits the other day. Do you know what grits are?
Oh, yes. I am familiar with grits.
Oh, all right.
I like grits.
Do you?
I've had them in Chicago when I was there for the Release Notes conference.
Oh, interesting. I
6
didn't know
years
that.
ago or something.
Yeah. All right. So I was at a farmer's market about a week ago, and there was a farmer had a stand, and they had made some homemade grits, which was like nice, homemade stone ground grits, white grits. There's white grits and there are yellow grits.
I've had yellow grits.
Yeah,
I've had the yellow grits.
they use different kinds of corn. The yellow ones are probably taste a little bit more, have a more pronounced corn flavor, I think.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I bought white grits and I made them, and they took forever to make because when they're completely dried out like that, and it took forever because I was doing it in a slow cooker. I was not doing it like on the stove, which you can do it a little quicker that way. But boy, they were really good. You just stir in some butter, little cheese, and make some cheese grits. Very, very good. I didn't know that you would know. It's a little bit like polenta. I was getting ready to tell you that it's a little bit like polenta.
It is like polenta. I think polenta has a different texture.
It
from
does.
Grits
Yeah, it
and
does.
grits. At least the grits I had a much stronger corn and cheese flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Polenta is pretty bland. Polenta,
True.
it's mostly just an excuse to have the sauce, like the tomato sauce and the sausage, like a meat around it.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually how we eat polenta. Or the other way that Italians eat polenta is, so you make polenta, and usually you always end up making too much polenta, right? So you always have leftovers.
Same with grits.
Yeah. So what we do with polenta is you put it in your fridge for like a day, and it's no longer like liquid.
Right.
Or
It
soft.
becomes firm, right?
It becomes firm. You cut it with a knife, okay, and then you put it in the oven and you grill it like a bruschetta.
Oh, that sounds really good.
Yeah.
That
You put some
sounds really
olive
good.
oil when you take it out of the oven, and so it's like a piece of bread. It's like a piece
Sure.
of bruschetta, but it's polenta, and it's delicious.
Oh, that sounds good. Yeah, actually, polenta comes in tubes here sometimes. Do they sell it in tubes?
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it because you can buy the quote unquote like the flour, right? Like the powder, whatever. But I have seen they're either tubes or like rectangles. I guess the
Right.
rectangles, because then you can do what I just described. You cut it with
Sure.
a knife, and so it's like bruschetta shaped.
Right, that makes sense. And it's more like bread. Yeah, no, the thing with grits, I mean, there are instant grits, like quick making grits that you can do that are supposedly a lot of the nutrition and other things is kind of processed out of them when you do that. And they can be softer and creamier, or you can get kind of what I had, which was just really coarse grits, which are stone ground and have, a lot more of the nutritional value that the corn has still in it. And they tend to be a little coarser and crunchier depending on how long you cook them. But yeah, they were really good. They were really good.
Nice.
All right, Federico, I got a quick pick for you, which is a movie that I rented quite a while ago now, but I hadn't talked about it. It's called Plane. And if you're in the mood for a good action thriller, that it's not the best action thriller ever, but it's also the kind of movie that's a very nice, just kind of sit back, turn your brain off, and enjoy an exciting movie. It stars Gerard James Butler and Jim Coulter. And Gerard James Butler plays Brody, who is a Scottish airline pilot who is taking off from, I think if I recall correctly, either China or I forget where, but he's flying over the Philippines. There's a big storm. His airline has him take this shortcut. He gets in this major storm. The plane gets hit by lightning. He has to crash land on a remote island in the Philippines that happens to be occupied by rebels. And so this really ends up being kind of an escape movie where I don't want to give away how it kind of ends, but he lands, everybody's kind of beat up, but they've survived. He's got a bunch of passengers. One of his passengers happens to be an accused murderer who's in custody. And, this is one of those kind of weird buddy movies almost, in a sense, where you have the kind of buttoned up pilot who is ex-military and has to take care of his passengers. And the person who is there who can help him the most happens to be the murderer, because he also happens to be kind of an action kind of guy. And so they team up. They go out into the woods looking for a way to communicate with the airline to, call for help. They find an abandoned building and are able to kind of hotwire a phone and call back to the airline and let them know where they are. In the meantime, these rebels find the passengers and take them prisoner. And there's, from there, there's a whole bunch of altercations with the rebels, the Brody and this other guy, the accused murderer. They're attacked by rebels. They prevail. They get back to the plane. They discover everybody's missing. They decide, we can't leave this island without our passengers. It's my duty to, protect these people. One of those kind of movies. And in the meantime, the airline is also sending a mercenary squad to the island to help rescue them all. And so Brody and this other guy go out into the woods, into the jungle, and go looking for the passengers who are at the rebels' base camp to try to rescue them. And I will stop there in terms of the plot because I don't want to give away the way it kind of ends. But it's one of those movies that's there's airplane crashes and a lot of firefights between rebels and Brody and these other people and these mercenaries who come and try to save the day. And it's a nice lightweight movie for a weekend when you just want to kind of take it easy. So that's my recommendation today.
All right.
All right, Federico, we are going to have to come back. Someday we're going to have to talk about that topic that you suggested to me. You know what I'm talking about, don't you?
I know. We'll talk about it. I also want to talk about Guy Fieri.
We're going to go to Flavortown, as they say. It combines a little bit of everything, and it just so happens to tease people. I've been to a few places that Guy Fieri has featured on his TV show since it's been on. That show's been on forever. Anyway, if anybody wants to prepare themselves for a Guy Fieri discussion in the relatively near future, it's on Max. So go check out some old episodes. All right, everybody. That's it for this week's episode of Mac Stories Unwind. You can find me and Tichy over at macstories.net. We're also on Mastodon. Just go to vitici.macstories.net or johnvorhees.macstories.net to follow us there. We're also on Instagram, where Federico is at Vitici. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHDDS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.